dictionary definition of music is the art of arranging sounds in time through the elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Low Pass Filter is a show about the nature of this thing we call music, how it functions in people's lives, how it's contextualized by society, and why we find certain music meaningful. This is Low Pass Filter. Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Low Pass Filter. My name is Mateo Noche, and I am here with Malcolm Bruce. Welcome, Malcolm.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Malcolm is a composer, singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and the son of Jack Bruce, who was the bass player and multi-instrumentalist and singer and songwriter in the band Cream.
Yes. Yes, he was.
Yes, he was. Well, you know, for you youngsters out there who may not be familiar with the band, it was a band that blended rock and blues and psychedelia and a hint of jazz to create a very, very unique sound, and still sounds great today, I think. Your father was the bassist, as we mentioned before, and the lead singer and oftentimes songwriter of the band Cream. So, you know, they were, as we say today, a monster. Really, they were huge. Eric Clapton, the guitar player, and Ginger Baker. I wanted to start off with this interview with a confession. You know, when I heard about the Heavenly Cream project, I was a little bit apprehensive because, you know, tribute records have a tendency to be not so terrific sometimes. But I just want to congratulate you and just say that this is really a lush and an imaginative and just a beautiful rendering of the Cream canon, you know. So congratulations. I think it's just a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think you have to be very careful with the concept of tribute records because you have the originators of things, and sometimes it's nice just to leave it at that, you know, because they were so great and usually innovators, and then everyone else is trying to copy them, and sometimes by copying something you come up with something new. I mean, let's face it, that's what the guys in Cream themselves, or the Beatles or the Stones, the first thing they would say, or the, you know, John Lennon or whatever, you know, the first thing they would say is, hey man, you know, we were listening to Chuck Berry, we were listening to Little Richard, and we loved those guys so much that we stole, you know, we copied them, but because we were like little white kids in Liverpool or London or whatever, we couldn't quite pull it off what they were doing culturally, how they discovered their own creativity. So we kind of bastardized it, we kind of turned it into something completely different and new, and then it became something new. So yes, tribute stuff is a bit tricky unless you can get inside of it. And I think maybe the difference with this is that a lot of the people, you know, it's a combined collective effort. I'm just one person in a big team that put this record together, but it worked. But we have Ginger Baker on the record himself, which legitimizes it. And I think when people listen, people that know Cream's music and know those kind of iconic songs from the 60s, and then they hear how Ginger is approaching the same material, but it's like a completely different thing. It's beautiful, you know, the way he, as an artist himself, is not just copying himself,
Right,
paying tribute to himself. You know, and that's, to me, this kind of music, it lends itself, or at the basis of this music is this kind of organicism. It's alive, it's fresh. Every time you play it, it's something new. And I think that's the mark of great music in this genre, that it has this aliveness, you know, and so you're not copying it note for note. And that's, I totally agree with you with the tribute thing, because, and there are absolutely incredible bands out there doing it, but they tend to sort of dress up, they put on the same clothes and a wig and learn every phrase exactly how, you know, hey, this is how Robert Plant sang this line, so I'm going to sing it exactly. There's something in that, but at the same time, they wouldn't do it the same way twice themselves. So I think hopefully with this record, I mean, the first premise was it's an acoustic tribute, so we're not playing, you know, Cream were well known for Marshall stacks and wah-wah pedals
Right.
and that psychedelic thing, which I love.
They
but
sold
we
a
just
lot of
kind of,
wah-wah pedals, by the way. I'm
they did.
just saying.
But I
So
also
Lynn,
think that Hendrix kind of, when Jimmy came over with Chaz Chandler, right around when Cream just launched, and Chaz, I mean, I knew Chaz a little bit when I was a kid, but you know, he brought Jimmy over, and apart from stopping off at Zoot Money's house from the airport where Andy Summers was living, that's a whole other story. One of the first shows that Jimmy ever went to was Cream's maybe second or third show that they ever played. And Chaz took him along and said to the guys in Cream, is it all right if Jimmy sits in? And they let him sit in. I think he played Killing Floor or something. And then after that, you know, Eric Clapton standing on the side of the stage looking at Jimmy playing and how Jimmy was. And then I think Jimmy influenced Eric at that very early point. Suddenly Eric was perming his hair and buying a wah-wah pedal. Anyway, so there you go.
Yeah.
I think Jimi Hendrix has got a lot to do with that.
Sure. And I think there's the story, probably apocryphal, that, you know, Eric Clapton said, I think I need to quit, or, you know, I'm not sure I can top this, you know.
Yeah, but then they became, I mean, they all, you know, my dad as well, they all became friends with Jimmy. How could you not? I mean, he was such
yeah.
an incredible artist. So yes, I mean, I think it's sometimes a little bit of healthy competition is good as long as you can handle it. I mean, Eric is such an amazing artist that he could handle it, and I think maybe that little bit more of a fire under him
Sure.
to
Yeah.
push himself
Yeah. That
forwards.
competition gets people going, and they get
Yeah,
their innovation machine happening. And yeah,
yeah,
they're topping each other, you know. So it's a wonderful thing, really. And
he
something
can
I
be.
think,
Yeah,
just in my personal humble opinion, is kind of missed these days. I think, you know, in those days there was such a cross pollination of different types of music and bands, and, you know, just looking, you know, the Beatles looking at what Brian Wilson was doing and vice versa, and, you know, and this, and Dylan, and going back and forth. And
yeah. I mean, Hendrix himself cited, you know, the Beach Boys and Dylan. You know, and obviously, I mean, you know, again, slightly apocryphal, but not really. I mean, Jimmy had issues with confidence with singing, and I think that early on he was encouraged in the sense of like, all right, you might not have a traditionally beautiful voice, but listen to Bob Dylan. And I'm a huge fan of early Bob Dylan records. I
yeah,
think his voice was this instrument that was unbelievable and unique and beautiful. It was later on he became a different thing, but certainly I could see Jimi Hendrix listening to those early Dylan records going, hey man, actually I can just be my own personality on this voice and not worry about sort of whether I'm, you know,
absolutely.
a bel canto, whatever.
Right. And, you know, not to stray too far afield, but I always felt like Jimi Hendrix had such a personal voice. It was just, it just came across, it had a really personal quality to it. And you know,
And going back to what you said about, you know, I mean, I think, you know, maybe we shouldn't get too much into politics and sociology, but, you know, we are in an interesting time. Corporatism is being pushed in a massive way. And so, and it clouds a free market competitive element that is part of our natural makeup to be competitive. Oh, you know, you're going to run, I'm going to try and run a little faster than you, but we can still be friends. And, you know, just because you're second fast, it doesn't mean you don't have value. We're now moving into a place where we're sort of almost told how to think and feel and be by unseen forces that are
well,
really not,
yeah,
they're kind of anti-human, really.
sure. The
They're
whole
sort of,
AI phenomenon, and
It's
and
we're just the
there's
beginning of that,
yeah. Well, there's an article, a really good article, is like the author's name escapes me, but about the flattening of culture. How about
yes.
how these algorithms feed us back, what we maybe have looked at one time, and then that's all we ever get.
And
And
the fragility of creativity, as you say, like, all right, so Jimi Hendrix sings a song and and his voice cracks a little bit, or this happens, or whatever. It's fragile, but because of that fragility, it gives us access to these deeper levels of humanity. And what is art if not an expression of your humanity? I mean, AI is great, technology is great, all of those things are incredibly useful, but if they take over, and they start calling the shots, then I think we're going to start getting into trouble,
right.
because maybe we need to use those things as tools, but not allow them to use us as tools, or maybe say, hey, those humans, we don't really need them anymore. We'll just get rid of them. So
Yeah. Well,
it's an interesting time.
yeah, it sure is. Yeah. So let's circle back to Heavenly Cream. And you sort of answered this, but let me just ask it more directly. What was the impetus for this project? What was the genesis, and why do this project? I mean, obviously it's a tribute to your father and his music, but what was the kernel that made you want to do this project?
Well, really, it was Pete Brown, who was my dad's chief collaborator, a lyricist, poet, lyricist. My dad worked with throughout both of their lives. And Pete came in. He co-wrote "I Feel Free" with Cream, but then by the second record, Disraeli Gears, he was really sort of the main songwriter with my dad. Obviously, they all contributed, Eric and Ginger and other people too. But so basically, Pete passed away last year, very sadly, in his early 80s. But I knew him for my whole life. I've written with my own work, which is a separate thing. I've written about 25 songs with Pete over the years, and Pete was just this guy that everybody loved. He was a singer himself and a songwriter, as well as just being a lyricist for Cream. He then went on to make his own records and stuff. And so I think there was just a timing thing. He was talking to the record label Quarter Valley Records about another project, and this idea came up. Hey, why don't we do an acoustic tribute to Cream, and we'll shoot a documentary. We'll do it at Abbey Road Studios. And so really Pete started the project off, and then sort of started reaching out to people like me. I immediately agreed to do it. Rob Cass, who's the producer on the record. And then we just, all the sort of our friends, Bernie Marsden from Whitesnake, he came on very early on, and Bernie had a friendship with Joe Bonamassa. So, it was very easy for us to shoot Joe a message and see if he wanted to do it. And it just kind of fanned out from there. So it really is in many ways, it feels like a record of a bunch of friends getting in a studio who happen to be musicians, because, as you know, musicians tend to hang out with other musicians because nobody else will have them, so it's like, who do I know in my book? Oh, okay, I know this guy or whatever, and he might know this guy. So I think the impetus was timing, and just an interest from the label to do something. And for all of us, it's a tradition, in the same way that if I sit down and play Chopin on the piano, or Bach or Beethoven, that's a few hundred years ago now, but we still keep that tradition going because those things are important. We learn from the past. And I think as long as we don't only look backwards, I think there's so much to be gained from a sense of your place in history. Again, as we were saying before, let's hope that the AI doesn't wipe out our history, and that, successive generations do remain, do continue to have an understanding of the importance of history. Look, I mean, politically, again, without going into it, war, and we still haven't learned that war doesn't go at, what happened to Vietnam, man? I mean, we should have learned from that by now. We're actually doing exactly the same thing. Is it because the military industrial complex want to make money, or is there a moral reason for it? It's like, so I mean, we can learn so much from history, and I think with music, and this project in particular, it just felt like the right time to look back on that material and sort of gain a bit of a fresh perspective on it. And so, yeah, I think it all just came together kind of more or less organically. Once Pete had sort of cut the deal with the label, it was just a question of reaching out to people and seeing who might want to do it and who might not want to do it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I just really love the arrangements, the horn arrangements on Tales of Brave Ulysses, just fabulous, and just a reimagination of those songs. So I just well, I was just knocked over really when I heard that.
Oh,
So
well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think when you do something like this and you set some limitations, I think that's really helpful, and it keeps people's egos in check. I'm a guitarist, and I like to whittle with the best of them. Let's put it like that. But actually getting Joe B to come in and saying, no, you're not allowed to play electric guitar, is kind of quite interesting. So he got creative. One of the guitar solos he sort of did it with an acoustic guitar, but he set up this sort of box, and then they amplified the box. Like, that's Joe. He's like
sure.
a little bit of a boffin. So he was the only guy that kind of found a little way to be it, like, well, maybe that's not exactly acoustic, but it sort of is acoustic. But generally speaking, it kept us all in check. Let's perform these songs as songs, and just strip it down to that kind of basic, what is a song? A song is a melody and some harmony and a little bit of rhythm. And so I think it's nice. I think what I got from the process was, experiencing the material in that sort of very fundamental way, without the bells and whistles of big loud amps and all that kind of stuff. And I think, yeah, I think we pulled it off. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was really pleased to see you covering some of your dad's solo work. You have a theme for an imaginary Western, which you did on a song for a tailor. And I think Mountain also did that,
Yes.
Covered that song, or maybe he might have been in the band. I don't know at the time, or.
No, well, Felix, obviously Felix was not with the first record that Cream made, Fresh Cream, but from Disraeli Gears, Felix had come in, was kind of brought in. I guess, I don't know all the deals, but maybe Arma Ertegun or the engineer they were working with at Atlantic, or for whatever reason, Felix came in and
Felix Pappalardi, for the people.
Felix Pappalardi from Mountain, and he became a good friend of my parents and my dad, and they had a resonance. Obviously, they were both multi-instrumentalists and bass players and songwriters and singers, and so yes, I would imagine that the reason that Leslie West, Corky Lang, and Felix did a cover on that song was partly because they became with that friendship with all of them. And interestingly, we sort of got away with putting it on this record, which is a Cream record, because Cream actually demoed that song towards the end of the existence of Cream. They made a bunch of demos, and so they did demo a theme for Imaginary Western, and it was rejected probably by the label as being a little bit too outside the remit of what Cream were, which was a more bluesy sound, although they were quite eclectic, I think. Back. But anyway, for whatever reason, they didn't use that demo, although that demo has been released subsequently, I think, on one of those kinds of B-reel type records that sometimes
rarities
come out. Yes, rarities. Yeah. So yes, and then it came out on Songs for a Tailor, which is I love. That's my favorite version. I just love the way that the kind of lilting rhythmic element to that song in that particular recording. So yes, I think, and also because it's a co-write between my dad and Pete Brown. Pete wanted to do that, and he wanted the opportunity to sing it himself. So yeah,
Well,
lovely song.
it occurred to me that, you know, in listening, re-listening to my copy of Songs for a Tailor, that there's a very similar feeling to your record and that record, because, you know, your father has horn sections going, and there's piano tunes, and there's, you know, there's a fair amount of acoustics, and sort of getting away from the sort of psychedelic Cream sound, and really kind of honing his own, kind of carving his own lane. So I felt like there was some analog between the two projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are little glimpses. You know, my dad was a composer in the sense that, I mean, everybody is, whatever they are, but, you know, because of his background, there was, you know, the Scottish folk music influences, there were classical music influences. So, you know, with Cream themselves, I mean, one example I sometimes cite is a song called As You Said, which is really acoustic guitar, cello, and Ginger's hi-hat. I'm not sure if Eric's even playing on it. But it just gives a glimpse of another area of my dad, the sound world that my dad was interested in. You know, obviously they could rock out and play the blues and all of that stuff, but there were all these other things that interested my dad. And I think that, yes, maybe there were lots of reasons why Cream split up. Personal, the business side of things, I think they were overworked, and they all got a bit jaded. They were on the road a lot, and all kinds of things, and drug problems, and whatever, all the kinds of things that go on and were going on 60 years ago. Sure. But I think another element is that the three of them were such incredible artists in their own right, and that they had all their own desires to explore different areas of themselves and different kinds of genres of music. And Eric had always been a little bit more straight ahead, like he was a bit more of a kind of purist when it came to the blues and Americana, and you saw that. I mean, although he's written and had success with great pop songwriting and all kinds of things over the years, so I mean, it's not like he was completely straight ahead. But with my dad, there were these other things, you know, folk music, the classical, you know, the ideas of classical music in terms of development, you know, the different ways of creating music, how you have a motivic idea, and that it might evolve and change shape in a particular way. And so you see that with a lot of the things my dad did in terms of his writing. You know, he would have an idea, but each time it came, it would successively shift and change somehow. And then you would get development in the sense that music would evolve throughout a piece of music, whereas perhaps the pop ethic tends to be a bit more verse, chorus, middle eight, verse, chorus, you know, and each time it happens, it's sort of the same. And so buried into, even with Cream's music, I mean, I Feel Free is a great example, one of the first songs they ever released, but you have these two bridge sections, and in the second bridge section, the melody is reharmonized to this descending harmonic structure, and it just creates, even though you understand it's the same music, something is changing within it. And so a very, very simple idea like that is a good example of kind of where my dad's head was at and where he was heading. He was just trying to kind of slip in, you know, proper music into pop music or something like that. You know?
Awesome. Well, I just want to name check some of the people that are on this record, which is kind of reads like a list who's who of really great artists. Pete Brown, of course, you mentioned Ginger Baker, and I want to come back to him, but Joe Bonamassa, Nathan James, Maggie Bell, Rob Cass, Clem Clemson, Paul Rogers, wow, Bobby Rush,
oh yeah,
and Pee Wee Ellis.
Yes.
Wow. What a cast for this record.
Yeah, well, Pee Wee was living in the UK for many years. He with his British wife. And he actually was playing with Ginger in Ginger's band, aptly named Ginger Baker's Jazz Confusion. I'm not sure if I would have, if I'd had the opportunity to tell Ginger, maybe you should think of a different name. But anyway, he didn't. So I think Pee Wee and Ginger had known each other. Ginger had a kind of checkered history of where he was living. Obviously he was living in Colorado for a while. He was living in LA for a while. Then he moved to Africa for many years, but he did end up in the UK. So I think for whatever reason he connected with Pee Wee, and they were friends and working together. Bobby Rush, I mean, that was incredible. He flew in and just was a wonderful presence. Was really kind to everyone, really encouraging, and I think we got a lovely result with him. Just an incredible artist, and still out there doing it at the age of 90 or whatever he is now. And he's just, again, to have someone like Bobby on this record, it just gives it this beautiful validation, certainly to me, that he understood and respected, the kind of the British guys that had taken his music, and kind of reinvented it and brought it back to the US in that sense. So, it's like a sense of family, a sense of collective identity that crosses over boundaries, crosses over borders, crosses beyond race, all of that stuff, that we tend to be obsessed about, and I think that's the healing thing of music, that it can bring us all together. So having Bobby was wonderful. Paul Rodgers was the only guy that we didn't get in the studio at the same time, so he recorded remotely. But obviously Paul, incredible artist, great singer. I knew Andy Fraser a little bit. I did a support tour for Andy, his last UK tour before he passed away. If anyone doesn't know, so Andy and Paul had a band called Free. Yes. And they co-wrote All Right Now, which is, I think it's still on heavy rotation in America. Sure it's like one of those songs that just everyone loves that song. And then they kind of split up, and Paul went on to Bad Company and many more things. So I think he's even singing for Queen at one point. I don't know.
That's right.
Yeah. But great. And
it's an eclectic family because you've got Nathan James and Maggie Bell in the same family.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Maggie, to me, I don't understand why, but I mean, she's just an incredible singer, an artist, but maybe not as known as much as she should be. I think people that really love this kind of music will know who she is, but I wish she had a bigger. She's just incredible, and so we had
never figure out why she wasn't bigger in this country, but
yeah, I mean, maybe because you had Janice, and I mean, because maybe it's the similar kind of area to, but I mean, it's unfair for me to even make a comparison. They're so different, but I mean, who knows? I mean, Stone the Crows were the band that she had, and that. I mean, people tend to be a bit careful about talking about them because they kind of had quite a lot of tragedy around them early on. So it's a little bit like when you talk about Shakespeare and you say the Scottish play, because if you actually say the real name, then somebody's head will fall off in the middle of the performance or something.
Yes.
So there's all of that. But anyway,
as I like to say, if you know, you know. Right.
Exactly. And also it's the Scottish connection. I actually had the good fortune to work with another Scottish singer, Maggie Riley, who my dad worked with. She's another one. I mean, there's just, I was on a Frankie Miller record, if people know about Frankie Miller, another Glaswegian. There's, I guess the Welsh have a tradition of singers, and the English
Tom Jones, right?
Tom Jones, but opera singers, big voices, you know. But I think the Scottish, there is a kind of Scots tradition of great rock and blues singers, you
Absolutely.
know, of which my dad, I guess, is part, although he did leave when he was like 17 and never lived in Scotland again, but he certainly retained, you know, hey, we're formed by the age of 6 months or something anyway, so there you go. But yes, Maggie, Nathan, just a wonderful, another wonderful singer with his band Inglorious, and Nathan came down the first time I met him. Me and Pete Brown, actually, we put together a tribute to my dad in 2016 at Shepherd's Bush Empire in London, and Nathan came down and sang a couple of songs, which was wonderful. We had Steve Hackett on guitar, and
Oh, wow.
Mick Taylor, and Lulu was our kind of big star. She was kind of like the headline. She sang Sunshine of Your Love as the finale. It was just wonderful.
Wow.
But yeah, and that was the first time I met Nathan, and he blew the roof off the place. He's got a great voice, and yeah, he's doing great things. So yeah, great to have him there.
Well, I wanted to touch on Ginger Baker. There's definitely no love lost between Ginger Baker and your father. I had always thought that the reason Cream died was because Eric Clapton wanted to play the blues, and you know, he just couldn't do the psychedelic pop stuff anymore. But in the more I read about it, and you know, your dad and Ginger Baker had a pretty checkered history, even before Cream. I think they were it was the Graham Bond organization together at one point, and your dad left just because he couldn't take Ginger Baker. But then a year later, they ended up in Cream together, you know.
I don't think anybody, you know, my mom, who I'm still, you know, she's around, I see her all the time, and, you know, so she was there at the beginning of all of that. But I don't think anyone really understands that relationship. You know, actually, the Graham Bond organization came from a band that they were all in previously called Alexis Corners Blues Incorporated,
Right.
which was formed in 1961. The original drummer was Charlie Watts.
Yep.
And when Charlie left to join the Stones, he suggested Ginger, but they all knew each other. And the Graham Bond organization emerged out of that band. I believe that Graham fired them all from Alexis's band without telling them, and then informed them that suddenly they were in his band, which went on to be a hugely successful band on the kind of British touring circuit at the time. They released a record called the Graham Bond, The Sound of 65 in 1965 that was quite revolutionary at the time, really. And I think Cream, you know, and obviously my dad and Ginger were in that band. And so in a way, I think without Graham, Cream would not have had that kind of eclecticism that we're discussing here in terms of the material and the approach. John McLaughlin, or John McLaughlin, depending on where you are, he was part of Graham Bond's band very early on as well. So, you know, it was that pool of people around. And I believe that Ginger pulled a knife on my dad and said, "You're out the band." And so it wasn't really my dad just sort of leaving, although he might have tried to turn up to subsequent gigs and had a similar response. I don't know. I mean, again, Ginger at that time, he'd got quite heavily into, you know, drugs in the early to mid 60s. And I'm not a historian, but that they could get heroin on the National Health Service. So, you know,
oh man.
So I think, you know, there was a tradition, certainly with jazz musicians, of taking that particular drug, going back to Charlie Parker, you know, and others, and so there was a kind of romanticized thinking, you know, thought process that, you know, maybe if I take enough heroin and live under a bridge and practice my instrument for
the tortured artist
27 hours a day, you know, that I'll be as good as Bird one day or whatever. But so, and you know, Ginger was hanging out with an amazing drummer called Phil Seaman, who was from a slightly older generation. And they were all, so, you know, Ginger descended into drug addiction. And my dad was a few years younger than Ginger. So there was probably a little bit of a kind of elder brother element to it. And, you know, hey, Jack, never try that, you know, as he's injecting himself, like, don't ever try drugs, you know. And of course, my dad became an addict later on, did go through a long phase of drug addiction. I mean, it's just, you know, I guess us lot, the next generation down and subsequent generation, I mean, people still take drugs, but I think it's a different thing now. I mean, to be a professional musician, I do yoga and meditate, and I'm vegan. I don't drink alcohol. You know, like I have to, because otherwise I can't. I mean, it's such a difficult job to be a musician these days. It's you have to have a certain kind of discipline. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. It's too competitive, and also, you know, there's a lot of work to be done all the time, whether it's music or business or whatever. But I think back then it was just a completely different time. So I don't know what happened. Well, what happened was that Eric Clapton was playing a show with John Mayall in Oxford, and Ginger drove from London to Oxford with his wife, Liz, his first wife, Liz, to go and see Eric. And so they went to the show, and then they had a drink with Eric after the show, and Ginger said, I want to put a band together with you, Eric. You're my favorite, you know, you're, because at that time in 1966, Eric Clapton was God, was being sprayed on the walls, and he'd found his way to, you know, there was Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page was well known as a member of the Yardbirds, but there were really just Peter Green, early Fleetwood Mac. So there were, you know, Peter's just probably the best out of all of them, in my opinion. But anyway, you know, so there were these few people that everyone respected. Ginger, but Eric being a few years younger even than my dad, and certainly a few years younger than Ginger, Eric had queued up outside the Marquee, along with my mom and everyone else that were fans of that music, to go and see the Alexis Corner Band or Graham Bond. So Eric was a fan of my dad and Ginger, in the sense that he was coming up when they were already a little bit more established, I guess. Right. And so when Ginger said to Eric, and my dad had played with Eric, with John Mayall briefly, I believe, and some other stuff. So they knew each other. They all knew each other. And so when Ginger said to Eric, I want to put a band together with you, Eric said to Ginger, well, if I'll do it if Jack Bruce is the bass player. So Ginger was like, oh, well, I'm not so sure about that, because they kind of fallen out over a knife, you know.
Yes. And
so I think Liz, lovely Liz, who's sadly not with us anymore, but I knew her, my friend Kofi, who's Ginger's son, his mum. So on the drive back to London from Oxford, Liz kind of apparently convinced Ginger to let my dad, you know, to go to my dad and sort of ask him if he wanted to do this thing. And so Ginger contacted my dad. My mum said, okay, to make sure that there's no funny business and knives and all that, why don't you guys meet at my mum's parents, my grandparents, who were really nice people, that they all knew each other. And so the story goes, Ginger and my dad met at my grandparents' place, and they shook hands and said, all right, let's do this, you know. And so
bury
yes,
the hatchet, I mean, but not in each
bury
other.
the hatchet is very appropriate. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. And then of course they fell out by the end. But I mean, I don't know, having never been a heroin addict, I don't know where that takes you. And also if you compound that with global, worldwide success, and, you know, people throwing their women at you, and how many drugs do you want now, you know, and all of, I mean, I just don't think, and they certainly weren't prepared for that level of success in the same way that John, Paul, George and Ringo weren't prepared for it. I think they loved it, but I mean, it would change somebody, a working class kid. Suddenly they're the most famous person. I just don't think we can understand any of that stuff really in the present modern day context. So, but anyway, yes, I having said all that, it was my dad's funeral at the end of 2014, which is almost 10 years ago, so
Wow.
hard to believe. But you know, I was standing with Eric and Ginger before we were going in for the service, and Ginger was crying. You know, he was genuinely moved and upset, you know, by the situation. So you never know. I think that's between the two of them and the divine in all of us and whatever. You know, I think, again, products of their culture, products of their environment, products of their time, the time and their class, and all of those superficial elements, of course, but ultimately do shape people's opinions and attitudes and behaviors.
Maybe possibly just
So
a tiny bit of making amends for participating in this project. You know,
well, certainly with you know, because there was a running narrative over the years with Ginger complaining about my dad and Pete Brown taking the royalties for the songwriting. But in truth, if you look across Cream's musical output, it's fairly well represented. You know, Ginger he co-wrote a song, Sweet Wine, which is on this record itself with my mum. My mum wrote that with Ginger. It's a beautiful song, and that's on Fresh Cream. My mum actually co-wrote 2 songs on Fresh Cream, Sleepy Time and Sweet Wine.
Oh, wow.
And she'd done a similar thing with the Graham Bond organization. She just has a talent for writing words. She would never claim to be some big time person. She's not like that. Otherwise, she'd be sitting here doing the interview with you. But I mean, you know, there was a narrative, you know, that Jack and Pete took all the money, you know, and it's like, well, it's not as simple as that.
It never is. Yeah.
But at the second, Ginger came in for 2 days, 2 separate days for this Heavenly Cream project, and on the second day, he, at the end of us recording, he was kind of sitting with Andy, his drum tech, in one of the booths, and he asked to see Pete Brown on his own, and so they spent about 15 minutes just chatting, and afterwards, Pete told me and everyone else that it felt quite healing. It felt like Ginger wanted, you know, he was kind of had a pleasant, decent conversation with Pete. I don't know exactly what was spoken about, but you know, that it did feel like that they were making amends after many years of this narrative of Ginger being sort of shortchanged or something, you know, which I don't think. Having said that, I mean, you know, if you some bands nowadays, they just share, they go, well, we'll just share all the money equally, so we'll get rid of all the problems, we're all contributing, even if I write something. The guys in Coldplay, what's his name, the singer, I think they do a kind of 40 25 20, some kind of split where he gives publishing to the guys in the band, because he'll write the bare bones of a song and then they'll arrange it together in rehearsal and before they record it. And so he felt like, why not give some of the publishing to the other guys in the band, even if it's my song, the basic thing is my song, they might come in and make it better in terms of arrangements, so they deserved it. So, you know, 60 years later, maybe if Cream were around now, they would have taken that sort of approach. I don't know. It would have. Yeah. It can certainly get rid of the kind of animosities that can arise in those sort of situations.
Well, if you think about music as a business, and especially the modern rock business, it was in its infancy, and really people were just sort of feeling their way along, and, you know, there was a lot of rascals, shall we say, and involved in the business.
There's still, believe me, there still are.
Well, yeah, I know there are, but I think people weren't sophisticated about, you know, and didn't have that forward thinking. I mean, a lot of this music was created in the moment and meant for the moment, and these people were living in the moment, and they didn't think much beyond that moment, you know, and so that led to problems down the road, you know. So
now it's sort of the inverse in a strange sort of way, because there's just you know, an oversaturation of music being released, and it's sort of virtual impossibility of getting paid for it. You know, it's like 1 million streams on Spotify is like $3,000 or something. You know, sounds like a lot, but to get 1 million streams, you know,
Yes.
in amongst, you know, 100,000 daily releases or whatever. So, you know, it's a whole different game now. And again, I agree. I don't think that they would have understood the business side, so they signed bad contracts. You know, that Cream's manager was the same manager that managed the Graham Bond organization, Robert Stigwood,
Yes.
who went on to huge success with you know, the Bee Gees, and then Andrew Lloyd
Movies
Webber.
too, I think, right?
Yeah, Grease and Saturday Night Fever,
Yeah.
and all kinds of, you know, Andrew Lloyd Webber's musicals. And but you know, he at the time in the mid-60s, he had a little office in northwest London, and was kind of trying to get it all together. Now, all of them, you know, then he partnered up with Brian Epstein, you know, the Beatles manager, and Nems, and they were co-producing shows in the West End. So, you know, from 1965 to 66, 67, 68, I think the business shifted and money shifted, and the whole concept around what was possible, you know, not just in the UK, but internationally. And, you know, I don't know all the details, but I think, you know, when a deal was cut with Ahmet and Nesuhi Ertegun, the founders of Atlantic Records, who again were business people, but they were doing jazz and, you know, like R&B and all of that kind of stuff. And then suddenly this second British blues invasion, or whatever it was called, suddenly all of these things were exploding. And so I'm not sure if they even really liked Cream's music, but they wanted to sign them. But then that deal was cut on the basis of also signing the Bee Gees, you know, all those kinds of wranglings and deals that go on.
Sure.
I wouldn't begin to really understand, but yes, I think there were issues around money. But also, again, it's like you're in a band, and the manager Stigwood goes, "Hey, I'll buy you a house, man. Oh, you want a Rolls Royce? Yeah, I'll buy you a Rolls Royce." And then you're like this kid who grew up in the, you know, the projects, you know, and suddenly you're being given stuff like that. You tend to go, "Oh, great. Well, I've got enough money in my bank, and whatever I want, they'll get me." You're not necessarily going, "Well, I'll have my accountant check out what I'm really owed," you know.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I wanted to, in the short time we got left, I wanted to turn back to you and ask you, were you always headed for the music industry? Was that something that you just, you know, the sea that you swam in, so you were,
It's all,
you know, destined for that, or
I,
did you ever want to be like a dentist or something, you know?
I fully blame my dad for everything. Yes, I think from a very early age, I knew that music was what I wanted to do. I was playing piano from the age of 5, and then bass guitar from the age of 8 or 9, and electric guitar around a little after that. And I was writing music. It just felt very natural to me. I have done other jobs to make it, you know, pay my way and all of that, but I've never really enjoyed it. But again, that's just a really interesting and question, and sort of almost impossible to answer, because it's the same for all of us, isn't it? It's like, what if I'd done this instead of that? You know, how would my life evolved? And, you know, so we all have a story. What were our formative influences? Why did we make choices we made? And am I going to sit around and analyze it and regret, or am I going to just embrace this incarnation of who I am and what that means? And, you know, yes, I don't think I was going to be a dentist. Maybe a chartered accountant. No, I'm kidding. Maybe the overlord of the universe. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I mean, it's an impossible question at this stage of my life and career to answer. You know,
Sure.
but having said that, I also feel like I'm only just beginning.
Well, you know, there's always that
You know,
rebelling against your parents sort of thing, where people started off saying, I would never do what my father is doing.
Yeah, but how do you
Which
do that if your dad's a rock star? You, the
this
rebellion
guy
is
right
the
here got involved in that. Uh, but and then there are other people just like, okay, I mean, I'm destined for this, and you know, it's in my DNA. It's in, you know, you know,
I think for some of us, you don't really have a choice. Whether it's, you know, it's the nature versus nurture thing as well. You have to take that into account. It's impossible really to answer. But certainly I was in the environment of musicians and making in the act of making music. And it seemed like it was a good path. You know, yes, the music industry is completely different now. Would you recommend somebody get into the music industry if they wanted to have a stable life, as you know, stable relationships, enough money to get a mortgage? When it goes good, it's great, but it's a rocky road. It's not an easy path these days. Maybe it never was an easy path. I mean, again, going back to Charlie Parker, because he was an African American and from a certain class, he had a terrible life. He was treated appallingly, a genius, because of the color of his skin. You know, he was treated like he didn't deserve to be alive. And, you know, hopefully we've moved on from then, you know, but other elements in terms of being an artist are still very prevalent. We're not respected, generally speaking. Creative people are not respected in the same way that a plumber or a dentist is. You know, if you're a plumber, you expect to get your hourly rate, and people respect that. With musicians, if they can get away with not paying you, they'll get away with not paying you, and it's appalling. I hope it changes one day, but I don't know whether it ever really will. It's just part of the aspect of what it is.
you have three siblings,
Yes,
and one of them, I think Natasha, is a DJ and involved in the music industry.
songwriter, yeah.
The songwriter. And so I'm curious, did they have a level of involvement in this, and what has been their reaction to this project? And
They didn't actually, they weren't involved in this project, but they were involved. My dad did his final solo record in 2013 called Silver Rails, which we also did in Abbey Road, and they were involved in that. For whatever reason, they weren't asked to be involved in this particular project. But you know, there will be other things that will happen in the future, and you know, we're all quite different. They're the next generation down from me, so their musical influences are a little bit different. I'm actually about to go out. I'm going to do a 20-day European tour with Kofi Baker in March.
wow.
And Kofi's awesome. You know, he's again had a pretty rocky relationship with his dad over the years, but also is like took what his dad did and made it his own. He's got his own voice on the drums. Incredible musician. So we're keeping all of it going. We're all kind of keeping it going, and we're all encouraging each other in various different ways. And hopefully at some point I won't just get, won't just be known for being the son of Jack Bruce, but I'll also kind of get my own music out there on a bigger level, so that, but I'm making a new record at the moment, but I'm
Well, I wanted to get to that. That was
opera
my
and all kinds
very
of
next
things.
question, which
Yes,
is
enough about my dad. Let's talk about me. No, I'm kidding.
fake
No,
humans,
I mean,
fake
yes.
humans and real dolls.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm still in the middle of writing and recording. I'm excited about it. It's quite a heavy rock sounding record, but it's very much my own style. I'm just kind of exploring what emerges, not following this kind of corporate rock thing that seems to have taken over people's minds. So, you know, hopefully it's something that's quite innovative. And in terms of lyrical conceptual content, it's sort of self-explanatory. It's a play on words, but it's also, we're living in this world where, you know, there's all this, it's hard to know what the truth is. We're being programmed and controlled and told how to be more and more. And so we kind of got this, you know, whether you want to talk about the Democrats and the Republicans, which is a bit sort of archaic at this point, in my opinion, but or Trump and Biden, or over here we've got the Labour Party and the Conservative. I mean, it's all just so negative because it's all made up. It's a narrative. Like we seem to have lost the ability to have authenticity in our lives and in how we express ourselves. Everyone's supposed to be right and the other person's wrong, and you've got to maintain that being right thing at all costs, instead of actually going, well, can't we all just, we can all coexist in love and compassion. What are these higher human values that are important? And so, it's just such an interesting time, as we said earlier, why are we still killing each other over these kind of concepts that may or may not have any validity in terms of reality?
Right.
It's just, we've all got to calm down and start appreciating each other more and more. Stop saying my religion's more important than your religion, or my belief system's more, or I mean, we are literally living in a world full of insanity. And I think and then as we touched upon earlier with artificial intelligence and technology, and we're moving into these kind of transhumanist and post-humanist concepts, we are kind of teetering on this crossroads. Where are we going to head? What do we want, and how can we function on this planet where we just, for goodness sake, stop hurting each other? It's completely unnecessary. It's immature. It's reliant on false belief systems, because any true religion, any true spiritual connection with the divine presence within and without precludes violence. Because as soon as you're connected to the source of all that exists, it informs love. It informs a sense of peace and a sense that the other people, in the appearance of an external world, are also part of us too. We are one thing. Sound like a hippie now, but I think there's a way to frame it in the modern context, for goodness sake. But of course there are all these forces behind, unseen forces, economic, corporate, political, social, individual, oligarchical powers that are having an influence on policy and having an influence on what's going on as well. So it's just really interesting times. So fake humans, real dolls. It's a little play on real dolls because of the sex toy real dolls, but it's not really about that. It's just about these kind of polar opposites, oppositional forces, and why are we not transcending to a place where we all agree? Like, I don't agree with what you think, but we can still be all right. We can still be friends. There's space. There's infinite space. There's infinite, and we don't need to have poor people. We can have, we can just change the economic system so that everybody has what they need. Why do we have all these problems on the planet? We need to grow up. So
Right.
if in my way, in a tiny way, if I can just attempt to express some of those ideas, it's not easy in songs, but without it being like, baby, we've all just got to be peaceful. You don't want to be like ridiculous about it. You have to come at it from a certain angle.
You're trying to make people think, and
I'm trying to make myself think first and foremost. But I do think probably too much. I'm trying to get people to maybe stop thinking and just start loving, because that's really all that matters. This life is so precious and so short. It's a fleeting wink that we exist, and so without it having to be, I don't owe you anything. Nobody owes anybody anything, but that doesn't matter either. Like, what you do is important, what you choose to give. And what tends to happen when we're more caring and kind and accommodating without sacrificing ourselves, but when we do that, we tend to get a better result, because the intention, the intention creates a ripple or reaction in life. And
I like to say that there's so many forces at work that all you can really do is just make your own little corner the best little corner. And
it can change the world. You know, it's you're just doing this little thing, but that can have an impact on how somebody else behaves, and then that other person, and then it just spreads out. I sound really idealistic by saying all of that, but I think somehow
I love it. Thank you.
It's okay, you know. It's okay to be a little bit idealistic, especially right now. So there you go.
Well, can you tell our listeners how to get a hold of Heavenly Cream or any of your other music that you've got out there? Where would they find it?
Yeah, I'm on social media. If people want to check out Quarto Valley Records, that's QUARTO valleyrecords.com. There's links to for Heavenly Cream. There's the download, there's a CD, and there's a double vinyl package. There's also a making of documentary called The Cream Acoustic Sessions that can be streamed online. People can, I think the details for that are also on Quarter Valley's website.
Okay, we'll put something down here.
Fantastic. And for me, malcolmbrucemusic.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, with X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm on Threads.
You're on all the socials.
Well, not all of them, but I guess most of them.
The major ones.
I'm still building it all up, as probably everybody is. You know, I haven't bought enough followers yet, but I'm planning to. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, Malcolm, thank you for this unexpectedly philosophical but very lovely conversation. You have been watching or listening to Low Pass Filter. My name is Mateo Noche. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Low Pass Filter.
Thanks, Mateo. Thank you.